Good day and welcome, Al. How are you doing?
I'm all good, Starla. How are you doing? You good?
I'm great, and just finished 2 sessions earlier today, talking about time boxing and no meeting Friday. So here we are on a Friday with sharing our knowledge instead, which is great.
It's a better way to spend the day than in meetings, isn't it?
Absolutely. All right, I will. You will share your screen and take it away. Have fun.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So, welcome everybody. So this session is all about how to configure elevated access to Viva with Entra. So a bit about me. My name's Al. I'm a technical architect. I work for Microsoft in the Microsoft Technology Centre here in the UK. Prior to joining Microsoft, I was a consultant. So lots of experience actually implementing the technology as well as just talking about it and trying to sell it. Um, I kind of focus a lot on the modern work side of things, productivity, employee experience, but also compliance, a bit about identity and the Power Platform. Uh, Prior to joining Microsoft, I was an MVP. I'm one of the founders of the Microsoft 365 Security and Compliance User Group, which we run once a month, and part of the Grey Hat Beard Princess podcast, where we talk about modern work and Power Platform and basically just anything that takes our interest, really. So, Microsoft Technology Center. It's a bit of a weird one. It's most of Microsoft is kind of sales. We're kind of a bit more of a pre-sales consultancy part of Microsoft. So we're quite small, but we are a global program. We have a network of centers around the world with technical architects like myself in each of them. And what we do is really support our clients to really understand how they actually implement technology. So removing obstacles and blockers, proving that technology will work in complex technology environments that they already have. And this session is kind of a bit of a mix of what we've done with some of them, but it's also a bit about how we've set this up in order to demo the Viva suite on our demo environment, which we use throughout all of these MTCs around the world. So what's the main problem I'm going to cover here? Well, it's not just related to Viva, but Viva's a great kind of starting point because we need to know who needs access to it. And when we talk about Viva, there are many modules. There are probably going to be different people who need to administer it. And there are, when we talk about Viva Insights, there are sensitivities around the data. There's quite delicate data that needs to be protected. It needs to be controlled. So we really need to know who needs access to these different tools and at what level. And also what happens when they change roles. What happens when somebody gets promoted or they're a new starter or they change their role. We need to know how we manage the permissions that people have. And importantly, ensure that we revoke permissions as well. It's no good kind of just starting off with, well, what permissions does somebody new need? Oh, they just need the same as Jane over there. Jane may have been through 3 different roles and accumulated multiple sets of permissions. So we really want some way where we can say, from a business perspective, this is the permissions that somebody needs based on the role that they are in at the moment, and a way to automatically say, once their role changes, those permissions will be revoked and they'll get a different set of permissions. So this problem doesn't exist just for Viva. This exists for many, many different areas, and pretty much every employee has a set of permissions that they need, and that needs to be managed. So if we know what the problem is, then what is the answer? Well, the answer is entitlement management. Now, this has been around for quite a while, but I'm going to show you what it is. I'm going to describe how it works, and then I'm going to do a lot of demos to show you exactly what this looks like, what it feels like to the end users as well, and how you can set this up. So entitlement management. Forgive the logos. This has come from a Microsoft site, so I know the SharePoint logo isn't the up-to-date logo, but it's quite a good depiction of the different moving parts that make up the core concepts of entitlement management. So the first thing we start with is a catalog, and a catalog is basically a container that we can manage, so we can provide access to that catalog, and we can delegate access to it outside of IT. So we can say that somebody in the business, so maybe HR, can actually manage that catalog. So they can manage all aspects of that catalog without IT being involved. A catalog consists of multiple things. So the core part of it is resources. So what are the things that we are going to give access to? So within the resources, we have groups, so M365 groups or security groups. We have applications. So if they're managed through Azure Active Directory, then and those roles are available, then we can actually manage those roles in the applications from within a catalog as part of the resources. And then we can also manage access to SharePoint sites. So when we think about those groups, those M365 groups, that can be access to a team, SharePoint sites for content, applications for actually interacting with those applications with given permission types. From that, we build a set of access packages, and these are basically a package of permissions for one or more of the resources, and these will allocate a particular level of permission for each of them, but they will also, for each access package, we will also have policies, and the policies control how people get access. So that means that we can actually say we want to create a package that's got permissions to maybe Viva Insights from an administrative perspective. And we can then set up a policy and say who can maybe self-serve, so they could request access. What are the approval processes that might be in place? And also, what are the revocation rules? So when does that package expire? Does it get renewed? Is it being reviewed on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis? So we can make sure that not only are we managing the process for approving the allocation of those permissions in the first place, but actually we can revoke them and we can check them on a regular basis as well. Now, on the right-hand side of the diagram that's on the screen, it has external directory. I'm not going to go into that in this session, but basically that means that we can have guest users, so external users actually use this as well. So where you might have a contract with a consultancy to provide services, their employees could be using their own accounts, but set up as guests in your environment, and you could allocate permissions to them based on this same principle. So I'm just going to focus in on the internal side of it around the Viva Suite today. But this whole approach is applicable to external users coming in and pretty much any application or any context you can think of where you're managing the permissions through Azure AD. So what does that approval process mean? So the approval process is a really key element here, because if you think about the scenarios where somebody might request permission, the person who knows they need permission may not be in IT. In fact, it's very unlikely they will be in IT. They are more likely to be a line manager, a project manager, a member of HR who knows who's supposed to have access to particular sets of data within the HR environment, or finance within the finance environment. So we're really looking to have an approval process here whereby somebody can actually say, oh, I've got option to select this access package. I can make a request. That request can then be submitted for approval. Now, the standard way that we can do approval is first up to look at the manager. So looking up the hierarchy in Azure AD and go, okay, can the manager approve? Yes or no? Yes, assuming they approve, we could have another layer as well and say, actually, we then want the project manager or the HR manager to then approve access, because they may actually have responsibility and accountability for the data that they are allocated access to. So the line manager could say, actually, Al needs to have access to this because I've assigned him to this project. But then Jane, the project manager, could be saying, actually, I know Al's been assigned to it. I'm going to give access to that because I'm actually the owner of this and I'm accountable for it. So we can have multiple layers of approval built into this. If the approval is granted, then that access will be delivered, and then the user will have access. But we can build in. It's completely left me. What am I going to say? Access reviews. Access reviews, so that we can actually review on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis. Does Al still need access to this data? Is he still assigned to this project? Is he still working on this data that he needs, that we've given him access to? And by default, we can set that up so that it says, no, we're going to revoke it if no response is received. So we can go with a more cautious approach to saying we can approve access, but then we can revoke it by default if it's not renewed by somebody. So the ability to actually have this lifecycle management around the allocation of those permissions is really powerful, because it gives us some accountability in the approval process, but it also gives us an audit trail that we can actually check when people actually had access and when it was revoked as well. So the concept is relatively straightforward. So how does this apply to Viva? So Viva's got a set of applications, the different modules, but it may also have some additional things that you want to use. So when we think about this, we're going to set up a catalog, and we're going to put in, so we can have owners there. So they may be HR, to say, actually, they can manage all aspects of the catalog, the resources that come in. So if somebody set up a new team, for example, that all of the Viva Engage owners needed to have access to, they could set that up and they could actually have that as a resource. But the owners are in the business, they're not necessarily IT. The resources. So in the scenario I'm going to show you, we can have the Viva Insights app, the Goals app. We can have some groups in there. So we'll talk a lot about the way groups are used to allocate permissions as well. And we can have sites in there. So, SharePoint sites as well. Once we've got those resources in our catalog, we're going to set up some access packages. Now, the scenario I'm going to focus in on is going to be the Viva Insights piece, the setup admin access. So somebody who can upload the data, who can change the configuration settings. An analyst, so somebody who can actually analyze that data, who has the right permissions in the application to be able to go in and see that information and to use, connect using Power BI, etc. They need to be able to have different access through the application. But then I'm also going to talk about business leaders. So how do they get that elevated access to information, but from within the app, within Teams? And then we'll talk a bit about Teams within Viva Goals as well. Once we've got those access packages, we'll set up some policies for them. So 3 different types of policy that we'll look at. We'll look at self-service. So how do I, as a user, select a package and request access, and then what does that approval look like? Allocated. So where we can manually say we want to manually set certain people to have access. And then automated. So how can we actually use other attributes of users from within Azure Active Directory to automatically give them access? And this is a really powerful way that we use with dynamic groups in Azure AD. But when its policies are being applied this way, it means that even if somebody changes their role, they will automatically be removed. So we don't really need to do anything if we've got that synchronization from an HR system to populate the appropriate attributes in Azure AD. We can automate the whole thing. So there's a few things that we're going to go through. So I'm going to do a bit of a demo of all of this and show you what all of this looks like. If you have questions, please do just throw them into the chat. I'll keep an eye on it. And yeah, just call out any questions as we go through this. Okay, so a demo. So hopefully I have sacrificed enough goats for this and it will all work as planned. So let me start with bringing up this view. So I guess where I am here, I'm just using a browser. And what I've got here is I'm in as myself. So I'm actually in as an administrator. So if I come in, so I've set some of this up because it was taking a little while to load in advance. So I've set some of this up just to make sure that it's showing. If you're setting up Viva, you would usually go into the setup and you would go into the Viva part, and it's taking time, so hopefully this is still loaded. Yeah, so you'd go into the setup, into Viva, and then you've got settings in here to actually set these different modules up. So if I go into Viva Insights, which hopefully is already set up, yeah, I'm actually in and I can see assign insights administrators, assign insights business leaders, and insights analysts. And these are the roles within the application that allow us to have those different levels of permission. So everybody by default will have permission to see their personal insights. But when we want to elevate it and see the organizational insights, we'll use the business leader. When we want to do the analysis using Power BI, so if you was on the previous session that Rob was doing, using the insights analyst role to really be able to crunch the numbers, then we will set that up. And the administrator would be uploading any additional data, so any hierarchical data in there, setting up the group sizes, etc. So when we come into these, if I come in here to the business leader, what we've got in here is we've got the ability to see assigned. So if I come into assigned, I can see that there are some names in here who have been manually assigned, but I've also got a group in here. So MTC, Viva Insights Business Leaders. Now, what I'm going to show you is how we can manage this group without actually having to set up to come in here every time and do this from an administrative perspective. So we're taking away a level of complexity for IT because they're not necessarily going to need to come in and set this up. But we can also show how we set up these roles automatically and do the manual allocations automatically based on using the entitlements as well. So we're trying to take away some of the complexity from this in order to make it more self-serve, easier for employees to actually access this. So I'm going to flip over to another user now, and I just want to show you from the end user experience, because this might take a little while to step through. So this is in Viva Insights. So at the moment, this is an end user. So we have Maria here. She's an end user. She doesn't have the organizational insights. So if we are looking at organizational insights, for the business leader, we would expect to see your organization and would see your company as well. Test environment doesn't have much data in it. So we want to set this up for Maria. So the way we're going to do this for Maria is we've set everything up, and if I come to so this is an onboarding site in my intranet, and all I've done is I've set up access to the request permissions. So this is actually my access. So it's built into Microsoft 365. It's not used very often. Okay, sign in. But it's there already. You'll be able to get in and go to myaccess.microsoft.com and your account, and it will be there. And it will have access packages, request history, approval, and access reviews. Now, access packages, these are all of the things that have been published to this user. So hopefully, yeah, we've got MTC, Viva Insights, Business Leader. So this has been published. This means there is a policy that has published this self-service approach to Maria. She can get in and access this. So if I click on this, what I will see is it's going to give me access to groups and teams. So it's going to give me access to a site. So Viva Insights is a SharePoint, a team site that we've set up. And it's going to give me access to business leaders, that group. So that was the group that we saw in the admin side. So if I just come back in, so Viva Insights as a team, let's just come into Teams in here, and we don't have Viva Insights in here. So Maria is not already a member of Viva Insights. So if I do request access, it's going to ask me for a business justification. So let's do Viva Explorers demo. And we can configure this, and I'll show you how you can configure this. And we'll do request access. Now, that request has actually been sent off, and what we can then see is we can see the request history, and so we can see in here pending approval, and we can view that, and we can see that it's been submitted by Maria and it's awaiting an approval. Okay, so we've got an approval process in this. So if I come back in, see whether this has done what it needs to do. So if I come back in, so again, so we're in as Leslie here. We'll come into the onboarding site that we were in before, and we'll go to request permission. So we're going to exactly the same location, exactly the same journey, but actually we're doing it from a level up. So Leslie is Maria's boss, and set up in Azure AD. Obviously, the first question for most clients is how accurate is your hierarchy in Active Directory? And usually the answer is not so sure about that. But this one is accurate. So we can see that we've got the request from Maria. And if I click on review here, I can actually have a look. Okay, so we've got Viva Insights. We've got Maria Becker, excellent. Request due by. So we've got a submitted. We've got a time frame for Leslie to come in and actually submit this. We've got that business justification that we put in, Viva Explorers demo. So we're happy with that. Okay, so I can approve that in the demo too. And so we can approve that and submit that. So we've gone through the approval process. Now, it does take a little while to actually provision and to actually deliver those permissions. But if we come back here, don't think it will be that fast. It's not that fast. So, but just remember, the team wasn't there and the Viva Insights wasn't showing. So we'll come back to this later and show you the outcome of this once those permissions have been delivered. But whilst they're being delivered, oh, actually, it's just popped up. So we've just seen Viva Insights has literally just popped up, and we've had a notification in there that said, actually, we've just been given permission to this, and this actually has different channels in here. So it's actually provisioned those permissions in here. So we should have access to the Power BI in here now. Automatically just pops up because that access package has been approved. Loading report. So that should be, we're straight in, we've got access, everything's done. So it's a really effective self-service process to actually request permissions to data that is quite sensitive, and if we don't renew this, it will be revoked after a period of time. So let me go back and show you how that was all set up. So rather than coming in here and setting all of that up, this wouldn't manage all of that self-service piece, that ability for Maria to go in and request something and for Leslie to approve it. This would just be done and it's there permanent, basically. So I'm in Entra in here. So Azure Active Directory, identity governance, all of these good things that now make up the Microsoft Entra suite of tools. If I come into groups, so let's start with groups, and I'm going to just show you the group that we set up. So I'm just going to do a search for Viva, and apologize, this is a test environment, so sometimes you get interesting things being set up in here, like all of these. So we've got Insights administrators as a group, and we've got business leaders as a group as well. So if I come in here, what we've got in here is this is assigned, so we've got properties in here. If I come into the properties, we can see that we've got a security group. It's the allocation of insights, and it is an assigned group. So we are actually assigning all of these members. So when we look at these, all of these have actually been assigned into this group. Now, the one that's been added just now, so that was Maria will be in here. And it's important to note that Maria is in here as well as all the others, because the others have been added differently. So this is an assigned group. We can always see exactly who's got access at any given time. And if we want to, we can actually just remove somebody from this. We probably would want to go through the entitlements and the access package instead. But this group has everybody in it. We can always see it, and we can always say this is managed by the entitlements. Go to the entitlements instead of coming in and removing people. So we set the group up, and then we're using it within our identity governance piece, which is where we find entitlement management. So in here, we've got a few different things. So we've got our catalogs in here. So we've got a few catalogs set up. So if you think about different sets of data that you might want to allocate, and importantly, because these are security containers, we can allocate ownership and permissions outside of IT. So for Viva, we've got a suite of tools in here, and we've got the applications and the resources all set up in here. So this has been set up. It's got resources. So we've got basically these different things. So you can see it says group and team or application. So we've got those two sets of types of resource in here. Assignable to roles and just an application and a team. So these assignable to roles are security groups that we can actually assign automatically to particular roles. And this one is the team. So this one is the one that popped up. The assignable to roles basically means, I should have shown that a second ago. Let's just go back in there separately. If I go back into that group that I was showing you, we've assigned a particular role in the application in there. So let me just quickly go back in there and just do a look for Viva again. And we'll go into the business leaders and let's look at assigned roles. And we've got the Insights business leader. So this is a role in Active Directory that we can assign. So we've assigned it, it's permanent. So we're managing access to this via membership of that group. So that's why it says assignable to roles. Some security groups won't be assignable to roles, they'll just be static. But these ones are assignable to roles, and they have been assigned to each of these different roles. When we look at adding these, something to be aware of is that when we're looking at groups and teams, that's relatively straightforward. We'll have a list of all of the groups and teams that are in Active Directory. Same with the SharePoint sites. But when we come to applications, if I look for Viva, I'll find Viva Goals. So I can add Viva Goals in there. If I look for Viva Insights, I'm not going to find it. If I look for Workplace Analytics, so the old name for Viva Insights, it's not actually there. So if I come back here and I have a look at the applications, because Viva Insights Workplace Analytics does exist, but actually it's not under the enterprise applications. So if I do a search in here and do Workplace, nothing there. If I take that filter away and do it, then I get Workplace Analytics. And this is basically how we're managing the permissions for Advanced Viva Insights. So I actually need to take that application ID, and if I do a search for that, then I will find it. So it's a little bit of a quirk to be aware of, that if you're going to use this for Viva Insights, A, it's still called Workplace Analytics, and B, to get that GUID, you need to do a search on all applications and take away that filter on enterprise applications so that you can find that Workplace Analytics. Once that's there, I can select that and it will add those in. So it says 0 of 2 already existed because I'd already added them. And what that does is that doesn't give us any roles in here. All we're doing in the resources is stating that these are the things that we want to allocate permissions to. So we've got these in here. We then want to group them into access packages. So if I have a look at the business leader one, which is the one that we used in the demo for Maria. So what we now have is we have resource role. So importantly, when we're in the access packages, we're now looking at, okay, out of that set of resources, I've got Viva Insights, and I've got that in here, and that's the team, and I'm assigning the member role. And then I've got business leaders, and I'm assigning a group. So I'm assigning it, and I'm saying member. Now, the other thing that I could do in here is to say, if I want to add an application, so if we were to take Workplace Analytics, I can actually add, and if the application has the right role, I can do that directly. Now, the application doesn't have the role that we want in here, so I haven't used that approach. But for the administrator package, we've got administrator, and so we can add that in. We've got analyst, so we can add that in. So we've got those different roles that we can automatically allocate from here if we want to. So we've got our groups that we're adding our membership to. So those are the roles that we're assigning. If I wanted to add a team, so if I just go to that Viva Insights team, so this one, and select that, again, it will give me, it'll know that that's a team, and it will say, do I want to add this person as an owner or a member? So again, if I'm setting up an administrator role, I can do, and I can say, actually, I want to give admin access as well as business leader access. So I can pick and choose the level of permissions for each of the resources that we're allocating access to here. So that gives us our access package. So we're saying that our access package has a set of permissions that we're giving out. Now, the next thing is the policies. So the policies are where we actually put the lifecycle management around these. So for this one access package, I have 3 policies. So I said that there were differences. So we've got a self-service with approval. So this is the one that we went through. So if I just edit this, so this is the one where Maria went in, she browsed what was available for her, and she then said, okay, this is what I want to request. So we basically said, who is this available to? So users in our directory, that's all of our internal users, but we can say, actually, what about guests? Yes or no? So we can say we want all members excluding guests, or all members including guests, or just specific users and groups. Now, specific users and groups is really useful because it means that we can say, if we only want to publish this to people who are in an HR group, in an HR team, we can do that. We can publish this just to people who are eligible so that not everybody has visibility of this access package even existing. So in this case, because this is a demo environment and I've set this up just for Maria, I could say users not in my directory. So if I wanted to have somebody external, I can do that as well. That's a whole nother set of activities that we can set up there, but we can basically have external approvers or none, admin direct assignments only. Now you might think, well, why would you use that? And that's more around the access reviews, the being able to bundle up, say, IT package of assets and saying, we want to assign it. We don't want it to be self-serve, but we then want to have a review of it. So different options that we can choose. In this case, one user. I said requires approval, requires justification. So I had to put in that this was a Viva Explorers demo. How many stages? So I chose 1 for this, and you can see the first approver. By default, it says manager as approver. I could choose specific approvers if I wanted to. If I chose 2, then it doesn't have that manager. It says specific approvers. So I could choose different approvers and then choose a group. So if I said NTC London. So I've got a dynamic security group here. So I could choose a group and use them as approvers. So I've got quite a lot of flexibility here in terms of how do I set up the levels. So if I take that back down to 1, I can set up to 3 layers of approval stages. For each of these, I need a fallback. And this means what happens if, for example, the manager isn't set for a user? What do we do? Or the user is inactive. What do we do? So a fallback is needed to set this up. How long are we going to wait before we expire the request? Do we want justification? So do we need some additional information? If no action, forward to alternate approvers. So if my manager doesn't approve, do we just do nothing, or do we then escalate to upper level? So we can do that if we need to. Do we want to enable new requests? So we can disable this as well. So we could say, we're replacing this with a new access package. Okay, no more new requests for this. We'll just wait for these to die out. And then we could use verified IDs as well. So this is a new capability around the identity management that basically uses a verified ID service rather than using AD. So where we're setting this up, we're setting it up around the requests, who can actually access it. So who's going to see it in their list of access packages, and what is the approval process in order for them to get the permissions granted to them. If we wanted to, we could have multiple extra questions in there. So we could actually set up multiple questions that might give the approver more information to make it easier to validate that, yes, this person should have access or shouldn't have access. If we wanted to, we could actually set up attributes as well to actually populate some of that information into Azure AD as well. And then we've got Lifecycle. So access package assignments, when are they going to expire? So if we assign it, how long is it going to last, and when is it then going to expire? This one's going to last 3 days. As I say, it's a demo, but it could be hours even. User can request a specific timeline, so they might only ask for a 2-week period. Are they allowed to extend access? Yes or no? And are we going to require approval to grant an extension? So if they requested access, does it need to be approved, or do we just say, yes, okay, well, they're just extending it, so that's fine? Those are about the user extending access, but actually what the access reviews do is to say, we don't want to worry about when it's going to expire. That will happen regardless, but actually we want to have a check. Do they still need access? So still to validate it. So in this scenario, if you think somebody is seconded into HR for doing a project to analyze Viva Insights data to make some changes for the way people work, that project might last a year, but actually some people might only be seconded in for a couple of months. So you might say, actually, we do want to check every month, do they need to review it? And that we might say 7 days, and we might say it's their manager that's going to do that. And every 7 days, every month, they are actually going to check and say, yes, Al still needs access. Yes, he still needs access. As you can imagine, that might get a little repetitive, but actually it's a really good way just to keep everybody on their toes to make sure that, yes, we're leaving permissions with the people who need them and not just leaving them stagnant and not revoking them when they need to be revoked. So the access reviews just adds that extra step to say, we know that we need to make sure we don't leave these permissions with somebody too long. And when we look at the advanced options, if reviewers don't respond, we can remove access. So this is where we can say, if there's no response in 7 days, okay, we'll remove access. They'll need to request it again if they still need it. The helpers, so the reviewer helpers, that information is, has the person signed in the last 30 days? Yes or no? If they haven't, then the recommendation is, and this is where we can take recommendations, is to actually just remove the access if they haven't actually signed in 30 days. So there's ways that we can kind of automate it reasonably intelligently to make sure that we're actually, by default, securing our content and not leaving these permissions open for everybody to use. So this is where we've set up a policy. And I'm going to just cancel out of this because this policy is the self-serve policy. So we've got an approval process for this one. The other type of policy that's really, really powerful here is to say we want to auto apply. And when I said we had one person, so Maria has been approved, we also have a dynamic application. So if I come into this one, so this works slightly differently, and this is more like dynamic groups. So if you've used those in Azure Active Directory, what we're doing here is we're actually saying, I want to automatically apply this based on attributes in that user's Active Directory account. So where we come in and we do the editing here, it's the same interface as we use for those dynamic groups. We're saying, right, the job title is Regional Vice President. Fine, we know that. There might be other attributes that we might use. So if we add an expression, we can choose a property. So we've got the standard properties in here, the extension attributes, which we can use. We can choose an operator. So we can build up quite a sophisticated query in here to identify people and use those attributes to automatically apply this particular policy and therefore apply this particular access package. And the beauty of this is that if I changed, so Leslie was the approver for when we did the demo, and Leslie is actually a regional vice president. Now, if I was to change her job title to something else, this policy would kick in and actually it would say, okay, well, Leslie is no longer a regional vice president, so therefore we're going to automatically revoke this particular policy, and therefore that access package has been revoked. So we can automate all of this and say, okay, if I want to check this, so Maria was the one that came in the demo, so Maria Becker, and Leslie was Leslie was her boss. And if I select that and just test this, what we get is Maria isn't in this group, but Leslie is. And that's because Leslie has the job title. So she has regional vice president in her job title. So this is where we can actually use this to quite easily automate who do we actually want to have the advanced permissions. Let me just discard that change as well. And what this basically means is that when we look at these policies, we can set up different approval processes, different approval steps to say, okay, self-service with approval, auto-apply. This self-service one has no approval, and it is automatically applying to a set of users based on their attributes. So we've got different ways to actually apply these and publish these different access packages out to the different sets of users. Some other things that we can do in here, we can do separation of duties. So if I wanted to say somebody has access to Viva Insights admin, we could say, well, they don't have access to Viva Goals admin if we wanted to keep two access packages separated. We can also look at we can review them. So we can review the access reviews, sorry, the assignments. So we can see who's been assigned in here. We can also see which policy they've been assigned to. And if they've got an end date, so Maria was assigned, hers has an end date because of the way that we set that up. So we can see that actually in 3 days' time, there is the expiration of this. So we can see what's in here in terms of how people have been allocated the permissions. So when we look at these access packages, each of these access packages can provide information and permissions to different groups of people with those different policies that allow us to then manage exactly who's having access, what their approval processes are, what the lifecycle management looks like. And we can also assign catalog owners or catalog readers, access package managers to create and manage those access packages, and access package assignment managers who has those assignments. So looking at revoking access if they want to. So this is where we would look at how do we get this out to the business and not have IT as a bottleneck for actually approving all of these. So there's a bunch of different things that I've shown you in there around those access packages. And when we think that they can give access to roles, this is where also if we come into Viva Goals, for example, sorry, in that one, if we go into a particular organization and we're setting up particular teams, when we look at the membership of those teams, we could be saying, actually, we want to say that in this team, let me manage that team. If we wanted to add a group in here, then we would, okay, we should be able to add in our group in there and then manage the access in here as well. So we're basically looking at the management of that group membership to be able to drive how do we actually have these different teams have access, and how do we then say from a self-service perspective, so just going back to Maria, coming into this My Access and being able to see, actually, I've got my request history, I've got my access packages, and this, if I refresh this, this will have one active. So we can see active access packages in here. That could be managed against those groups, any groups that we have within Azure AD that we're using to allocate permissions or teams or SharePoint sites. We can actually use these access packages to actually grant those permissions. So it gives us a quite very effective way to automate some of that self-serve and make that employee experience a lot slicker. So when you're looking at onboarding, you've got one place to go. Okay, I have default access to all of this. What do I then need to do my job? Well, I need to go and look at the access packages that are published to me in order to then determine exactly what permissions I need, rather than it just being, and here are all of these permissions. So let me just come back to these slides and just to recap a bit of what I've shown you. So as an administrator, creating a catalog, creating access packages, creating those policies, publishing those policies so that as a user, we can browse those access packages, we can request them, or we can automatically apply access packages and revoke them as well. As a manager, we can approve those access packages, and then as a user, that access just pops up. It just comes into our environment. So if we've been added to Teams, they just pop up in Teams automatically. There's nothing else that we actually need to do as a user. So our experience as an employee is improved because it's a much slicker approach to how do we actually get access to things. We can also track it and see, whether approval has been granted or not, and have much more visibility rather than just sending off a ticket and waiting to see what happens. When we look at the benefits, group permissions based on role. So those permissions, we're looking at saying, how do we actually say for a given role, we want to actually either create a security group to allocate permissions, or we automatically do it. And that's based on who we publish those policies to. So as an employee in a particular department or a particular job role, I get those published to me, and then I can do that self-service request. The allocation of permissions is automated. We have full lifecycle management, so we can always go back and audit it. We can see who's being approved. We can manage that whole lifecycle really effectively. And then if we do want to, we can delegate approval to external parties as well, so external sponsors. When it comes to licensing, it's worth noting that this is an Azure AD Premium P2. So there's a lot of the Microsoft 365 packages will have this in, but it's worth checking because members who can request access need it. Members who request an access package need it. Approvers need it as well. And also those users who have a direct assignment or the automatic assignment also need it. So essentially, if you are interacting with access packages, then you are going to need to have this level of licensing. It's also needed for those dynamic groups in Azure AD. So it is a very good package to have in terms of being able to automate the management of these permissions and to make it a much easier process for IT to manage these, but also for users and your employees to actually request them. So if you're thinking about this when you go back to your own organization, think about a catalog of resources. What resources are you pulling together? Do you have SharePoint sites, teams? Are there security groups that you're using to allocate permissions? Are you going to use those applications that are directly in Azure AD and allocate those permissions directly? Group them into access packages that are applicable. If you have a team administrator or a project manager, they may have different permissions than your team members. So thinking about those access packages and as groups of permissions, sets of permissions that you're bringing together. And then think about those policies. How do you want those individuals to actually select that they need those permissions? Do you need an approval process in place? What is the expiry? Do you want access reviews? So thinking about the policies, how you automate that is the next step. And then test this in a small way. Test it with a friendly group and try and make sure that you're then looking at the permissions to have as few of these as possible, rather than having one policy for every granular option. Think of it as saying, actually, do these people all work together? Do they all need the same thing? Can I tie it to a team membership or something? So thinking about making it as slick as possible so that people have a few of these to select when they start as a new joiner, and then they can actually move forward and use those roles without having to renew lots and lots of them as well. So that brings to an end this session. I do have another session at 5 o'clock UTC, 6 o'clock UK time, about what Viva means to your employees. So really talking about how do you relate the Viva suite to your employees and really directly to their experience and their activities. But I want to also check and see whether there have been any questions.
No questions so far.
No questions.
Thank you very much for a very practical session. I see a lot of customers are doing this manually. And when we talk about Viva, we talk a lot about working smarter in Microsoft 365. I think this is how to work smarter as an admin and to have a smart process around getting access to the different roles that you have within the Viva suite and in Microsoft 365 in general.
Yeah, and I think that's it. It is in general as well. Viva is a great use case for it because the application for Viva Insights is there, but it's pretty much, you could apply this to anything that needs permissions within Microsoft 365 or Azure.
Absolutely. So thank you very much, Al, and have a nice day. This is the concluding session for this time zone in Viva Explorers around the world. We will take a break and then we'll be back for the US East time zone. While I was saying that, we did get a question.
Oh, fantastic.
No, and we did not get a question. It was something else. All right.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Thank you. Have a great afternoon and enjoy the rest of the conference, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye. Thank you.